The wind carried the faint scent of autumn rain across the quiet town, weaving through narrow streets. Brushing gently against the windows of an old stone house where Elena often sat alone, watching the world outside as if it belonged to someone else. She had always felt a fragile connection to life, like a thin silver thread that tied her to the world but could snap at any moment. Her heart, soft and unguarded, held a universe of longing she never dared to reveal. And yet, everything changed the day she met Adrian. That he appeared in her life the way dawn slips into a sleepless night. Unexpected, gentle, quietly overwhelming. Elena met him on a late afternoon when she sought refuge from the cold drizzle beneath the roof of a small riverside cafe. Adrian was sitting by the window, absorbed in a worn-out notebook filled with messy lines of poetry. She remembered noticing the faint tremble in his hands as he wrote and the glow in his eyes, as if he saw worlds beyond the one in front of him. When he looked up, their eyes met, and something shifted inside her, as though her heart finally recognized something it had been waiting for. Their first conversation was hesitant, sprinkled with delicate pauses and half-smiles. Adrian spoke softly, with a voice that carried both warmth and sorrow, as though he had been living with secrets too heavy to share. Elena felt drawn to him with an unexplainable force. And as the rain continued falling outside, they sat together, talking about books, distant countries, childhood fears, and dreams they had abandoned long ago. Each word he spoke unfolded within her like a blooming rose, delicate yet consuming. From that day on, they began meeting almost every evening. Sometimes they sat by the river, watching the moon cast a shimmering path across the water. Other times they wandered the old streets, tracing the cracks in the cobblestones, talking about the fragility of the human soul. Adrian had a way of seeing beauty in the smallest things, the way wind played with fallen leaves, the sound of church bells at dusk, the poetic melancholy of forgotten, dust-covered windows. Elena had spent her life hiding her feelings, but with him she learned to speak in whispers of vulnerability and hope. Yet behind Adrian's gentle smile lived a quiet storm. Elena sensed it in his gaze, in the way his hands froze sometimes as though touched by memories he could not escape. She didn't ask. She simply stayed beside him, loving him with silent devotion. But the more she opened her heart, the more she feared losing him. In her dreams, she saw him standing at a distance, fading like mist at sunrise. The fear haunted her, weaving itself into the fabric of her love. Adrian, too, felt the weight of an invisible clock ticking somewhere deep inside him. He carried within his chest a burden he had never shared with anyone, a shadow that followed him since his youth. His past was a labyrinth of broken moments, and he believed he was a man unworthy of the kind of love Elena offered so freely. But her tenderness softened him, wrapped around his soul like a warm embrace he didn't know how to accept. Some nights he lay awake, listening to the silence, terrified that his presence in her life would eventually destroy her. Their love unfolded with the intensity of a poem written in the heart of winter. It was beautiful, fragile, and haunted by inevitability. Elena began to write letters to Adrian, though she never gave them to him. In each letter she confessed her fears, her longing, her gratitude for the way he breathed life into her silent world. She hid the letters in a wooden box beneath her bed, afraid that revealing them would break the delicate balance of their relationship. One evening, as they sat at their favorite spot by the river, Adrian took her hand and held it with trembling fingers. He whispered something she would never forget, words that sounded both like a promise and a farewell. Sometimes, he said, we belong to people we cannot stay with. Elena felt the world around her freeze. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the fragile expression on his face stopped her. She realized then that his heart was carrying wounds she could never see, and that his love was both a gift and a silent tragedy. She rested her head on his shoulder, wishing she could take his pain into her own chest, wishing she could rewrite whatever fate awaited him. As autumn slowly melted into winter, Adrian began to withdraw. His smiles grew shorter, his laughter quieter, and his eyes dimmer, as though the light inside him was flickering. Elena felt each change like a crack spreading across her heart. She tried to hold him close, but he drifted like a leaf carried by an unseen current. Some nights he didn't come to see her at all, and when he did, He felt distant, almost transparent, like a man fading from the world. One cold December evening. Heavy snow fell from the sky, covering the town in a silent blanket of white. Elena waited for him by the river for hours, shivering in the cold, watching shadows move through the trees. When he finally arrived, his coat dusted with snowflakes, she saw in his eyes a sadness so deep it seemed to swallow the light around him. He sat beside her without a word, as if searching for something he had lost inside himself. When he finally spoke, his words broke her. "Elena, I can't stay." Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could respond, Adrian took her hands and pressed them to his chest, right where his heart beat weakly beneath fragile ribs. "There are things," he whispered, "things you don't know, things I cannot let hurt you. I have been living on borrowed time. I tried to outrun my past, but it's here now, and I can't drag you into the darkness with me." Elena's tears froze on her cheeks as she begged him to explain, to trust her, to let her share his burden. But he only shook his head, his eyes glistening. "I love you," he murmured, "more than you can imagine, and that is why I must leave." That night he kissed her with a tenderness that tasted like goodbye. She clung to him, desperate, feeling his warmth slipping through her fingers like melting snow. But as dawn approached, Adrian walked away, disappearing into the pale morning light. Elena stood alone by the river, her heart breaking in quiet, unbearable silence. Days passed in a blur of emptiness. Elena searched for him everywhere: the riverbank, the old streets, the cafe where they first met. But he was gone, as though the world had swallowed him. She felt as if life itself had abandoned her, leaving her suspended in an endless winter. Then one morning, in the cold, dim light, Elena found a letter slipped beneath her door. The handwriting was unmistakable, Adrian's, shaky and uneven. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. In the letter, Adrian confessed everything he had hidden: the illness that had haunted him for years, the treatments he had endured, the fear that had consumed him. He wrote of how he fell in love with her unexpectedly, how she brought him more joy than he had ever known, and how he could not bear the thought of letting her watch him fade away. He wrote that leaving her was the greatest pain he had ever known, but he believed it was the only way to save her heart from breaking more deeply. Elena collapsed to the floor, pressing the letter to her chest, sobbing until her voice dissolved into silence. She realized then that Adrian had not left because he didn't love her. He left because he loved her too much. Weeks turned into months, and winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the first fragile blossoms of the season. Elena would walk along the riverbank where they once sat together, feeling his presence in the whisper of the wind and the gentle ripples of the water. She carried his letter everywhere, reading it until the ink blurred from her tears. One afternoon, she visited the cafe where they had met. She sat at the same table by the window, tracing the grain of the wooden surface with her fingertips. She imagined Adrian sitting across from her, writing poetry in his worn-out notebook. The emptiness of the seat felt unbearable, yet she found solace in the memory of the man who had touched her life so deeply. Then, one day, a small package arrived at her doorstep. Inside was Adrian's notebook, the one he always carried. The pages were filled with poems, sketches, unfinished thoughts, and letters he had written to her but never delivered. The last page held a message in his trembling handwriting. "If love has a soul, Elena, it lives in you. If I reach the other side of the night, I will carry your name like a light in the darkness." The notebook became her treasure. Through his words, she felt as though he was still speaking to her, guiding her through the pain, reminding her of the beauty that still existed in the world. Years passed. Elena grew older, but her heart remained tied to the memory of the man who had changed her life. She never stopped visiting the river, never stopped reading his poems, never stopped whispering his name into the wind. People in town often saw her sitting alone by the water, a faint smile on her lips, as though she were speaking to someone only she could see. But Elena was not alone. Not really. Adrian lived in the rhythm of her heartbeat, in the softness of her footsteps, in every breath she took. Their love, though marked by tragedy, had carved itself into her soul, becoming a part of her that could never fade. On her final evening, many years later, Elena sat by the river at sunset. The sky was painted with shades of gold and rose, like a silent blessing from the heavens. She held Adrian's notebook in her hands, now worn with time. As the last light of day shimmered across the water, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." A gentle breeze touched her cheek, warm and comforting, like a familiar caress. And in that moment, Elena felt a presence beside her, the same warmth she once felt on those winter nights long ago. She smiled softly, knowing she was not imagining it. When the townspeople found her the next morning, she was sitting peacefully by the river, her face serene, the notebook resting against her heart. They said she looked as though she had simply fallen asleep. But those who knew her story believed something else. They believed Adrian had come back for her. They believed their souls, after years of longing, had finally reunited, and somewhere beyond the reach of time, somewhere beyond the fragile world they had once shared, Elena and Adrian walked together once more, side by side, into a dawn that would never fade.